The courtroom had learned to obey Victor Hale without being told. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His confidence filled the space the way smoke does. Slow, choking, unavoidable. Senior partner, donor, fixture. When Victor Hale stood at counsel table, judges adjusted their glasses and clerks double-checked spellings. He smiled like a man already reading tomorrow's headline. Across the aisle sat the woman no one noticed. Her name was Mara Ellison. She wore no colors that caught the eye, no jewelry that asked for attention. Her posture was straight but small, as if she had learned to take up less space long before she ever entered a courtroom. A thin manila folder rested on her lap, corners worn soft by handling. Victor glanced at her once and dismissed her just as quickly. She had no visible counsel, no entourage, no show. The case was framed as simple, a property dispute, an inheritance challenge brought by a distant relative who had misunderstood the terms of a trust. Victor's firm represented the estate. He spoke of clarity and closure. He spoke of efficiency. He spoke as though truth were a matter of paperwork already filed. Mara said nothing. When asked if she understood the proceedings, she nodded. When asked if she wished to make a statement, she declined. Her silence read as surrender. The gallery leaned forward only when Victor did, when he laid out timelines, signatures, notarized pages that slid across the bench like coins. The judge listened. The judge always listened to Victor.
What no one heard was the quiet sound of foundations shifting. The trust document Victor presented was immaculate. Too immaculate. The dates aligned too neatly. The signatures carried the same pressure, the same angle. He spoke of intent with the confidence of a man who believed intent could be manufactured if the paper was clean enough. Mara watched his hands. She had learned long ago that hands tell the truth when mouths do not. The manila folder on her lap stayed closed. It had been closed for years, opened only in private rooms under lamps that hummed. Its contents were old, older than the firm, older than Victor's smile. The paper inside smelled faintly of iron and dust. The judge ruled quickly, for the estate. Victor thanked the court with a practiced nod. He did not look at Mara again. He was already packing his briefcase, already late for another room where he would be obeyed. The bailiff called the case concluded. Mara remained seated. The judge noticed the stillness. Ms. Ellison? She stood then, slowly, not to argue the ruling, not to plead. To request the record remain open, she said. Her voice was steady, unadorned. Victor paused, just long enough to be irritated. For what purpose? The judge asked. Mara held up the manila folder. For submission of a document, she said, one that predates the trust by 14 months. The room shifted. Victor smiled thinly. He had seen bluffs before. People found papers all the time, papers that meant nothing. The judge hesitated. Why was this not presented earlier? Mara met the bench. She did not look at Victor. Because it was missing, she said, until last week. Victor laughed once, softly. Your Honor, with respect. The judge raised a hand. Mara placed the folder on the clerk's desk. She did not open it. She did not explain it. She stepped back into herself, quiet again. The judge ordered a recess. Victor's smile did not return, because for the first time he could not see what was written on the page, and he understood too late that silence was not absence, it was preparation.
The recess was meant to last 15 minutes. It stretched into an hour. Victor Hale paced the hallway outside the courtroom with the irritation of a man unaccustomed to delay. He made 2 calls he didn't need to make, spoke to people who answered too quickly, reassured himself with phrases he had used for decades. There was nothing a forgotten document could do that his firm couldn't neutralize. Paper was his language. He spoke it fluently. Inside the courtroom, the judge read in silence. Mara Ellison sat again, hands folded, eyes lowered. She did not watch Victor. She did not watch the clerk. Her attention stayed fixed on the bench, on the subtle tightening at the corners of the judge's mouth. The document was not dramatic. That was its power. It was an amendment, filed privately, never recorded in the public registry, signed by the decedent during a narrow window when Victor Hale had been temporarily suspended from representation due to a conflict of interest he had failed to disclose. The ink was faded, the language precise. It named a trustee, not Victor's firm. The judge called the courtroom back to order. Victor straightened, already forming objections, already mapping counters. He rose before being recognized, confidence reassembling itself out of habit. "Your Honor, I must object to the admissibility." "Sit down, Mr. Hale." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Victor froze, then sat. The judge adjusted his glasses again. "This amendment references an escrow account," he said, eyes still on the page, "one that predates the trust you submitted." Victor nodded once. Standard contingency language. The judge looked up. "It contains account numbers." A pause. "Those accounts," the judge continued, "were closed 12 years ago, reopened 3 months later under a holding entity connected to your firm." The air changed. Mara remained still. Victor stood again, more carefully this time. "Your Honor, firms restructure, entities evolve." "So do investigations," came a voice from the back of the room. No one had heard him enter. The man wore no robe, no badge on his belt, just a plain dark suit, posture relaxed, hands empty. His presence settled into the room like weight. "Judge Calder," he said calmly, "Marcus Rowan, State Financial Crimes." Victor did not turn. He didn't have to. He knew that voice. Everyone in his world did. Rowan did not raise charges quickly. He raised them once. The judge nodded once. "Mr. Rowan was invited," he said, "after I reviewed the amendment." Victor's throat tightened. "This is highly irregular." Rowan smiled faintly. "So is routing trust assets through a dissolved escrow to avoid probate review." Silence pressed in from all sides. Rowan stepped forward, placing a thin folder beside Mara's. It was darker, thicker, marked only with dates. "We matched the account numbers, then the signatures, then the withdrawals." Victor finally turned. Mara met his eyes for the first time. There was no triumph there, no accusation, only certainty. "The amendment," Rowan continued, "was never meant to be found, which is why someone paid to have it removed." The judge leaned back slowly. "Ms. Ellison," he said, "how did you obtain this document?" Mara stood. "My mother was the notary. She kept copies of everything." Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Rowan closed the darker folder. "We'll need the court to suspend enforcement of the verdict pending review," he said, "and we'll need Mr. Hale to remain available." The judge's gavel did not strike. It didn't need to. The verdict Victor had won sat on the bench like glass, already cracking, and the quiet woman returned to her seat, hands empty now. The trap had closed. Victor Hale did not leave the courthouse that day. He told himself it was procedural, temporary, a misunderstanding that would be resolved once the right calls were made. Men like him always believed the system bent because it always had. But systems remember when they are forced to stop. The financial review began quietly. No press, no spectacle, just subpoenas moving through offices that had not been examined in decades. Servers mirrored, accounts frozen, names cross-referenced against shell entities that had once been clever enough to hide in plain sight. Victor's name appeared everywhere. The trust was only the first fracture. Once investigators followed the reopened escrow, they found patterns, the same dates, the same routing, small diversions that added up to enormous certainty. Assets that should have been protected had been siphoned,
laundered, justified with language Victor himself had taught junior partners to use. Arrogance had made him efficient. Efficiency had made him traceable. The arrest came in his office. No handcuffs at first, just men in plain suits standing patiently while Victor finished a sentence he could not remember starting. When they did take him in, the cameras arrived late. The headline was smaller than he expected. It did not use his full title. It used his full name. The firm dissolved within weeks. Partners testified. Files surfaced. Settlements were offered to avoid trials that would never end. The verdict Victor had once won was formally vacated, then reversed. The estate transferred intact, untouched at last. Mara Ellison never attended the press conference. She signed the final documents in a quiet room with a single window. The manila folder sat open on the table, its contents finally unburdened. The amendment was returned to its place, not as a weapon, but as a record. The judge addressed her once more, privately. "You knew this would happen," he said. Mara nodded. "Eventually." "You could have spoken sooner." She closed the folder. "Then it would have been about noise," she said, "not truth." She declined interviews, declined commentary. She did not correct narratives that misunderstood her role. She didn't need to. The legacy wasn't her silence. It was what her silence allowed to be seen. Years later, law students would study the case not for its drama, but for its lesson. How a system built on appearances nearly erased its own foundation. How one unassuming document, preserved without ambition, outlasted power built on shortcuts. Victor Hale's name became a footnote. Mara Ellison's never did. Because the verdict that mattered most was not the one announced in court. It was the one that survived it.
Power demands to be heard. Truth only waits to be found.